Hello lovely people, welcome to Samhain. If you celebrate, I wish you nothing but good wonderful things and a lovely little ritual for yourself. But for today's video, for a little bit of spooky fun, I figured we would conclude Youtober, which wasn't quite my 31 videos that I wanted, but life happens, as does work, and we got closer this year. I believe I hit around the 26th, 27th mark, so close, just a few off, and I'm calling good. Anyway, I had a request over on Instagram to do a video on Ouija boards and my thoughts and feelings on them. And I want to take this as an opportunity actually to do a little witchy research if possible. Anyway, so let's get into the Ouija board. So I feel like the Ouija board for me kind of sparked this whole concept of wanting to look into more witchy occult things in a very more historical basis and see the actual origins of so many of them, and not just kind of like a, I'll say what I did in the previous years is about a light deep dive per se, and I would like to do an even deeper dive if possible. So I kind of started this whole thing with basically attempting to find some more solid sources about the origins of the Ouija board and stuff, and less that is shrouded in mystery and more of just, I wonder if the origins are as simple as I've been able to find, and it's actually not that complicated and therefore not big of an issue. I was trying to find some more like actual historical books on it, and so that I could read, and I couldn't find anyone that would ship to me in time for read for this, but I'm gonna look into it more later. But it's not necessarily a topic or a divination tool that intrigued me. Weird as cars making noises outside. I've always been way more in vibey in the sense of a tarot deck, just asking questions and then meditating about them, maybe asking for a more random sign, but direct translation through a board or a pendulum, those types of deals were never really my shtick so much. Some of the fun things I did find out though about the Ouija board. So again, first things first, just like popping it off of freaking Wikipedia. The Ouija board is also known as spirit board with talking board. Is a flat board marked the letters of the Latin alphabet. We all know this, how this looks. Use a planchette with multiple people to move it, or supposedly a spirit moves it around during a seance. So this says spiritualists in the United States believe that the dead were able to contact the living and reportedly used a talking board very similar to that of the Ouija board at their camps in the U.S. state of Ohio in 1886 to ostensibly enable faster communication with spirits. Following its commercial introduction by the businessman Elijah Bond on the 1st of July in 1890, the Ouija board was regarded as an innocent parlor game unrelated to the occult until American spiritualist Pearl Curran popularized its use as a divining tool during World War I. Paranormal and supernatural beliefs associated with the Ouija board, of course, have been criticized by scientific communities and are characterized as pseudoscience. The action of the board can most easily be explained by the unconscious movement of those controlling the pointer. Mainstream Christian denominations, including Catholicism, have warned against the use of the Ouija board, holding that they have led to demonic possessions. Occultists, on the other hand, are divided on the issue, with some claiming it can be a tool for positive transformation, while others reiterate the warnings of many Christians and caution inexperienced users against it. One of the first mentions of automatic writing method, which is kind of like a grandfather, I guess, to this type of board, is found in China around 1100 AD. This historical document of the Song of the Dynasties method known as Fuji planchette writing. The use of a planchette writing as an essentially means of necromancy and communion with the spirit world continued, and albeit under spiritual supervisions, and was central to the practice of the Guangzhen school until it was forbidden by the Qing dynasty. As part of the spiritualist movement, mediums began to employ various means for communication with the dead, and it became very popular following the American Civil War in the United States. Mediums did significant business in allegedly allowing survivors to contact lost relatives. The Ouija itself was created and named in Baltimore, Maryland in 1890, but the use of talking boards was so common by 1886 that news reports the phenomenon taking over spiritualist camps across Ohio. Employee of Elijah Bond, William Fuld, took over the talking board production. In 1901, Fuld started production of his own board under the name Ouija. Charles Kennard, the founder of Kennard Novelty Companies, which manufactured Fold's talking board and where Fold had worked as a varnisher, claimed the name Ouija from using the board and that it was an ancient Egyptian word meaning good luck. When Fold took over the production of the board, he popularized the more widely accepted etymology that the name came from a combination of French and German words for yes. I mean, it seems to me like a lot of businessmen kind of just poking their brains in when it comes to the specific use of the Ouija board. And some fun things here that they have written down is some fascinating things people have said they've done with the Ouija board. So Emily Grant Hutchings claimed that her novel Jap Heron, a novel written from a Ouija board, was dictated by Mark Twain's spirit and the use of a Ouija board after his death. Okay. Pearl Lenore Curran alleged that for over 20 years she was in contact with a spirit named Patience Worth. This symbiotic relationship produced several novels and work of poetry and prose, which Pearl Curran claimed were delivered through her channeling Worth's spirit during sessions with the Ouija board. Much of William Butler Yeats's poetry was inspired, among other facets of occultism, by the Ouija board. In late 1963, Jane Roberts and her husband Robert Butts started experimenting with the Ouija board as part of Roberts' research for the book on extrasensory perceptions. According to Roberts and Butts, on the 2nd of December 1963, they began to receive coherent messages from a male personality who eventually identified himself as Seth, accumulating a series of books dictated by Seth. Now this is really interesting because Jane Roberts and Robert Butts, their book, which they then wrote supposedly with this spirit, Seth, is actually a book that my mother was very, very much into as she was discovering her spiritual journey. I believe my grandmother on my father's side turned her onto it. And it's a book that she's given me. I think I actually have it on the bookshelves. One second here. Yes, here we go. As we can tell, I've been attempting to read it for a while. That bookmark has probably been there for over 2 years at this point. So yeah, The Nature of Personality by Jane Roberts and notes by Robert F. Butts. So I didn't realize that they had first contacted the entity they were supposedly talking to through a Ouija board. That's interesting. So I think definitely it's a use of, again, like so many other divination tools, it can be used as a trickstery sort of thing. Always caution, I guess, when contacting other sources, outside entities, that type of deal. And the actual name Ouija, I think that is very much, it's just become a popular name for a spirit board. And spirit boards clearly do have a long history going back so far else, at least through just the base of Wikipedia. For more verified sources, let's look into that, shall we? So this is from Time magazine, is what I'm now reading off of, so slightly more credible than just plain old Wikipedia. The Origin of Evil and the True History of the Ouija Board. The new movie, Ouija, Origin of Evil, one of 2016 Hallow Season's horror movie offerings, arriving in theaters on Friday. Clearly this was written back in October 21st of 2016. I also did watch that movie in preparation for this. It was very clearly any spirit could come through the board, malevolent or otherwise, so I guess they did a good job portrayal of that. It was spooky enough if you're so interested. It just laid an example of Ouija board's unique, so the movie that was arrived in 2016 is the example of Ouija board's unique ubiquity in pop culture. Over 100 years, the product, now owned by Hasbro, has been a staple of the spooky. And though it may not actually provide a link to the spirit world, it does provide an indication of what's going on in the world during its most popular moments. Time discussed that the history with Robert Murch and the Denver-based self-described chairman of the board at the Talking Board Historical Society, who's been piecing together the Ouija timeline for the last 25 years through archival research and conversations with the descendants of the founders. Murch then describes, its origins are still shrouded in mystery, but in 1886 a few things happened. There's an Associated Press story about new talking boards taking over northern Ohio. So we know talking boards exist in Ohio, but a man named Charles Kennard, living in Chestertown, Maryland, claimed to invent the board that would then become the Ouija. He asked a man who worked right next to him, E.C. Reich, a cabinet member and coffin maker, to make a few. So Reich later claims he came up with the idea too, and that Charles Kennard took it from him and went to make it a business. So we don't really know exactly who did the thing. It's a huge hit with Chesterton from 1886 to 1890, and then Kennard goes to Baltimore and beats Elijah Bond, a lawyer, in April 1890. We think in April 25, they had a seance with Bond's sister-in-law, Helen Peters, who whom Bond calls a strong medium, where they ask the board what it wants to be called, and it's spelled out Ouija, which was then asked what that means. The board spells out good luck. The building where the seance happened is still there at 529 North Charles Street. It's a 7-Eleven. So Elijah Bond files for the patent, and the patent's office says you have to prove it works. A grandson of Helen Peters says his grandmother told him the family story, and Bond took Peters to the patent office in Washington, D.C. They show it to the first clerk, who says, "I don't want to be the laughingstock." They get the chief clerk to say, "If that contraption can spell out my name, then you've got your patent." Peter takes out the Ouija board. It spells his name. The chief clerk, visibly shaken, says, "Okay, you've got your patent," but the patent doesn't talk about why it works. When the Ouija board was invented during the Victorian times, it broke a lot of rules. At a time when you weren't supposed to be alone with people of the opposite sex and people weren't supposed to be touching, the Ouija board was built so that you put it on your knees and your fingers would touch. So this was the ultimate date game. The original directions would say that for best results, use with 2 people, lady and gentleman preferred. That's why men wanted to buy it for women. So that's very interesting. I hadn't heard about that before. Of course, then we have The Exorcist 1973 that had a big impact on how people view the board. Earlier movies would make it a joke. It would spell something embarrassing. It is in an I Love Lucy episode called The Seance. Then in The Exorcist, it inferred that this little girl used the board and then becomes possessed by a demon. This idea of demonic possession of the Ouija board takes off and terrifies America. All of urban legends out of the Ouija stations, are in the movie Witchboard. So all of the films that feature the Ouija board made since draw on Witchboard. So there's that. So then there's the Ouija board guy. I kind of wanted to do a little more research into, if I so could find. So Robert Murch. So in 2012, the TBHS collaborated with Baltimore Museum of Industry to host the first ever kind of its exhibit displaying talking boards from the many eras along history. The exhibit, named Let the Spirit Move You, Ouija, Baltimore's mystifying oracle, highlighted the Ouija's deep connection to Maryland and Baltimore's past, from its invention by Charles Kennard or E.C. Reich in Chesterton, to its long history and manufactured in Baltimore from 1890 to 1996. The exhibits featured boards from throughout the Ouija's history, as well as historical artifacts from seances, spiritual communications, and toys manufactured by the Ouija's parent company. Guests curated by the THS founding members, Robert Murch and Brandon Hodge. The exhibit features contributions of talking boards and other artifacts from the collections. So the original Ouija boards were much more like they were on actual pieces of wood. They were much more sturdy. Whereas the ones you would buy now are probably fold up plastic like any other board game per se. And honestly, I think this just comes down to a lot of things. When you're reaching out or wanting to contact and stay in contact with other things, I think it's one of the reasons, especially when the veil is then reaching out in that time, simple protection magic goes a really freaking long way. Now, this is a piece of divination that interests you. I say dabble if you so choose, but again, use a little protection magic. Cast a little circle if you so choose. Get maybe some herbs, cleanse the area out. Always close out the board with goodbye. I think that's a very simple thing that closes most sessions out with it. It's a very simple rule, the Ouija board. But I would like to look into possibly more into different historical artifacts, and I think that's one of the things I'd like to do for this channel going forward. Is the videos might be way more few and far between, but I would like to do little mini full-on researchy things as opposed to shorter videos, and pop in more that have to do with my practice, but more to do with also what I'm looking into, what I'm researching, things bringing up for me, that type of deal. This book might be one of my research into. I might interview my mother about how that's affected her. That can be an interesting one. I did not realize that there was a thing with the Ouija board involved. Because when it comes down to it, I do believe that if there are entities, gods, other things beyond the veil, then there has to be at some point a way to cross it or breach that in some way, and I'm sure science will eventually figure out exactly what that is, and a lot of the things that we have called certain names or mystified will then be explained by science, probably in some way, shape, or form. This is my personal belief. Whether or not you vibe on such a thing, that's with you. But I do think this is the same way we get messages, and why our dreams get really freaking weird, and why our meditations can be so vivid, and daydreams can be so vivid and so distinct at times. It's because I think some messages are coming through, whether you believe them to be God, deity, higher self, another entity, malevolent or benevolent, what have you. When the veil is thin, or even when it's not thin, receiving messages and using it can be for good stuff and whatever. Just make sure you're using your protection magic effectively and you should have no issues. That was today's video. I hope you have a lovely Samhain. Maybe it will include a Ouija board for you. Mine will not. Mine has some other ancestor magic, possibly a little bit of tarot involved. But I hope you guys have a wonderful year going ahead, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.